Chapter 8. Seren, are you okay? Domin's voice pulled me from the buzz of my thoughts as I sat on the ground, fiddling with the phone in my hand. I looked over to see him crouched beside me, his eyes washed in concern. I'm fine, everything's fine. My voice came out forced as I pushed myself to my feet, not sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. All that was left of the life that defined me were tiny pieces I had to find a way to reassemble into something new. And beneath the fragile cloak of shelter this place provided lay the terrifying possibility of being found and of losing Lilica. It was a thought too large and brutal to sit with, and it closed in around me, stealing my breath. Domain stood, his hand resting on my shoulder. You don't have to try to hold it together. I know this isn't easy. No, it's not. I stared up at the trees, watching as the branches trembled in a silent dance against the smoky sky, my voice slipping out in a choked whisper. What if they find us out here? Seren. Domin's voice grew low, his eyes flashing with a momentary unease. Trendon doesn't know about me, does he? I shook my head. My visits up here had always been under the ruse of a medical conference, or a stealthy slipping away with my clearance pass during work hours. It was a secret that always gnawed at me, but one I was now grateful I had never divulged. Then you're safe here. They shouldn't be able to trace the Jeep back to this place, and they will have no reason to search the compound. His hand traveled up to my neck, his fingers brushing against my cheek and causing a shiver to wash across my skin. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure they never find you, okay? It was a promise I knew he shouldn't make, but one I so desperately needed to cling to. I closed my eyes for a moment and drew in a shaky breath, allowing myself to tumble into the shelter of his touch, into the refuge of his words. And for one brief moment, I could remember what it felt like when it was just us, before the world got in the way. Mommy? Domin dropped his hand and I quickly pulled away, feeling heat creep over my cheeks as I saw Lilica standing in the open doorway of Turk's cabin with a large book clutched to her chest. Hey, sweetheart, what do you have there? Fairy tales. Turk said I could have it. The stretch of her smile softened the edges of my thoughts, and I ran my fingers through her hair, gently untangling the strands. He did? Well, that's awfully nice of him. Turk leaned against the side of the open door. Yep, that book's been sitting lonely on the shelf for years, just waiting for the right kid to come along. He gave us a nod as we stepped back inside the cabin. I handed the phone to him. Thank you for all this. Not a problem, and feel free to stop by whenever you like. My library is at your disposal. I looked up at the rows of books on his shelf. How did you get all these anyway? I knew a guy. He threw another wink my way. He's a pursuer of the past, so to speak. Every so often he comes up here and I help him decode MCOR files. In return, he leaves me books. I ran my finger along the spines, an endless array of worlds from which to choose. My pulse quickened as I came to a book, the color of night sky. Plucking it from the shelf, my hand traced over the title, scrawled in cursive across the cover. The Secret of Dreams. Are you a dreamer, Seren? Turk's question caught me off guard, and I turned to him, the tendrils of my yearning curling around me like faint whispers. No, I've never dreamed before. Most who live in the grid are unable to. He motioned toward the window. It's from the resonance. I've come across some studies on the effects that wireless technology has on our minds. He smiled and folded his hand over mine, pressing it against the book. Take it. It's yours now. I know one day you'll find your dreams. We walked back to Domain's cabin in silence. Lilica clutched her book and skipped ahead of us, bending down occasionally to pick up treasures from the forest floor. An acorn with a cap like a top hat, a stick in the shape of a bird, the feathery tendrils of moss. She deposited these into my pocket for safekeeping, already rebuilding her world from the filaments of earth and wood, harvesting her own landscape. As the cabin came into view, Domain stopped walking and turned to Lilica with a playful glint in his eyes. You know, I don't think you've met the chickens yet. Would you like to help me collect the eggs? Chickens? Lilica looked over at me with confusion, and I gave her a smile. The eggs we buy in packages at the store. That's where they come from, hun. Chickens. Are they alive? Domine chuckled and motioned for her to follow. Yes, they are very much alive. Lilica caught up to him, and I watched as they disappeared around the back of the cabin. The call of a crow rang out in the distance, and I stood for a moment at the edge of the clearing, bathing in the stillness as my breath moved in time with the branches above. That feeling of longing swept over me again, like a hidden memory that had never been mine, but it filled me with a strange mixture of joy and sorrow. I found Lilica and Domine behind the cabin, standing beside a small penned enclosure, her eyes wide and fixed on the 4 chickens pecking around in the dirt. Mommy, can I go inside? Is it okay to touch them? I think so. I turned to Domine as he unlatched the gate with a nod, picking up a small woven basket and handing it to Lilica. It sure is. They're really friendly. Would you like to go find their eggs? With a smile, she grabbed the basket from him and stepped inside, her hands tentatively reaching out as the chickens gathered around her, the sound of her giggles filling the air. When did you get chickens? I asked, leaning against the wooden frame of the coop. He shrugged as he grabbed some feed from a bucket and sprinkled it across the ground, causing the chickens to redirect their attention away from Lilica in a sudden flurry. I've had them for almost half a year now. Made a trade with a guy who lives up the hill. I stared into the distance, suspended within the thoughts that wove around me. The gentle simplicity of Domaine's life was such a stark contrast to the sterile confinements of the grid, with its walls and checkpoints, digital screens and devices. It was a breath of fresh air I had almost forgotten the feeling of. Has it really been that long since I've been up here? Yes, it has. His eyes flashed with all the unspoken words still hovering between us, bringing me back to the last day I had visited him. The day had quickly turned to a late afternoon as we stood outside his cabin, lost in conversation, the kind I never had with Trendon, my mind bursting with the elation of shared thought as we spoke of philosophy, science, and social structures, the way my skin prickled with electricity when his arm brushed against mine, the dizzying rush of his eyes on me, the moment when I wanted to lean in closer and feel his lips on mine. I had left in such a hurry after that, the look of sorrow on his face colliding with the flight, feeling of guilt that gnawed a hole in my gut. I had always told myself that my brief trips up here were to help him with supplies he didn't have access to, but beneath that lay the deeper reason. I had never been able to truly let him go. I had hoped time would temper the flame that always burned when I was around him, but standing beside him now, I realized it never would. It was always there, smoldering like an ember I could not extinguish. And I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to navigate around it. Guilt was no longer keeping me at a safe distance, for the last threads of my marriage had unraveled, and I was now cut off from the world that bound me to them. It was fear that pressed against me now. I was terrified of the fire, the intensity. I had grown so accustomed to guarding myself, to avoiding the depths of my emotions. It had been the only way to survive living on the grid. I couldn't feel trapped if I never longed for flight, and I couldn't lose something if I never reached for it. Mommy, look, I found eggs in little boxes. Lilica's voice pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked over to see her running toward me. Oh, wow. I peered into the basket she had clutched to her chest, speckled eggs the color of sand and snow. Looks like you found them all. Almost. I think there's one more. Domaine bent down and rustled around in the fallen brush beside my feet, and then something warm and round rested in my hand as he curled his fingers over mine with a faint smile. Sometimes things are hidden right in front of us. Time no longer passed by in measured hours, gone with the days dictated by the constant pulse of ticking clocks and holographic alarms. Here time took on a leisurely pace, guided by the way the sun hit the trees in the morning, the slant of shadows as they cast their imprint on the ground at dusk. The forest was alive with its own cadence, impervious and resilient, and we were only visitors. Dry brush crunched beneath my feet. Seeking to replenish my collection of herbs, I scanned the ground for yarrow, bergamot, and mullein, looking for open patches within the trees where wormwood grew. September had crept in, and the faint yellow hue of larches could be seen scattered throughout the forest. We had been here for 5 days now, sharing a new rhythm within the small space of Domeen's cabin, and Lilica had yet to ask me when we were going home. But I knew I needed to tell her soon. "Mommy, what's this?" Lilica crouched on the ground, her chin resting against her knees as she stared down at a small circular group of fungus growing among a patch of grass. I reached out to touch the light brown caps, noting the central hump and the pliable flesh, the stem tough and unable to break between my fingers. "Well, these are called fairy ring mushrooms." She looked up at me. "What's a mushroom?" I knelt beside her. "Well, they're a type of fungus that grows in the wild. Some of them are very poisonous, and you must never touch them without checking with me first. Do you understand?" She nodded vigorously at me with wide eyes. "But these right here are edible." I took from my pocket the small bone-handled knife I had found in Domeen's cabin and sliced up a few caps. "We could fry them up for dinner tonight. I read that they have a very sweet taste." "Like candy?" I smiled and dropped them in my basket. "A little bit, yeah." Mushrooms were no longer found in the supermarkets of the grid. Like ginger and garlic, the medicinal properties within them had been banned from public consumption, deemed unclean and possible carriers of disease. It was years ago, before the state had put my childhood home up for auction, that I had stumbled across an old textbook buried beneath some boxes in the attic. Edible and Medicinal Herbs of the Pacific Northwest, one of my mother's contraband collections, hidden for safekeeping, like trails of breadcrumbs left for me to find. I had memorized the entire text in one night, my mind soaking up the information and storing it away in the private compartments of my photographic memory. This gift allowed me access to information that was untraceable and unable to be erased. It was what had made my knowledge and distribution of herbal medicine at the clinic possible, and it now came in handy as I combed the forest floor. "What else can we eat from the woods, Mommy?" Lilica sprang to her feet, excitedly looking around. "Well, I think there might be some salmon berries somewhere around here." I grabbed the basket and took her hand in mine. "Let's see if we can find any." I didn't take long until my eyes caught the burst of yellow and orange nestled in a patch of leaves. Lilica held out her hands eagerly as I filled her palm with the ripe berries, sun-warmed and sweet like honey. "It's time to get out of the smoke, love." Knowing the minimal protection of her cloth masks, I quickly retraced our steps, looking for the trail that would lead us back to the cabin. "But I want to stay and look for more forest treats." Lilica reluctantly followed behind me, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I wish we could." I looked up into the hazy, sunburned sky, as if I could will a patch of blue to appear. "Maybe we'll get some rain soon. That will help clear up all the smoke." The sound of an axe against wood grew closer as I located the small trail that wound its way back toward the cabin. From the edge of the woods, I saw the shape of Domeen in the clearing beside the front door, and my breath hitched in my throat. He had taken his shirt off, and a faint sheen of sweat glinted off his broad shoulders and back, the muscles in his arms rippling with tension as he drove the axe into the log. "Domeen!" Lilica ran over to him with something clutched in her tiny fist. He set his axe down, shooting her a wide smile as he swept his arm across his forehead and reached for his shirt. "Well, hello, wood nymph. What you got there?" She pulled off her mask and beamed up at him, gleefully taking to this new nickname he had given her. Trendon had never called her anything but Lilica, his interactions always stoic and staunch, believing playful epithets were the language of the ignorant. "We found forest food. This is for you." She thrust something in his direction, and as I made my way to the door, I could see the orange fruit she had apparently saved for him, now smashed to a sticky pulp in her hand. "Wow, this looks delicious. Thank you so much." With a chuckle, he scooped the berries into his mouth and glanced over at me with an impish grin as I slipped past him and into the cabin. I shut the door behind me, feeling vaguely flushed as I rooted around in the drawer, looking for the roll of twine Domeen had said would be in here. The door opened just as I was securing the ends of string into the wall, creating a line across the window to hang the herbs. Lilica bounced onto the bed, her fingers flipping through the pages of her fairy tale book, already lost in a world of ink, color, and fantasy. "Did you find anything good out there?" Domeen came up behind me, smelling faintly of sweat mixed with pine sap and wood chips. It was a blend I found alluring, and a wash of desire hesitantly stirred within me. I turned to him, pulling out my clippings from the basket. Yeah, I found a few herbs I could use. He leaned against the sink, watching me as I reached up to tie some mullein onto a string. I made something for you. My hands stilled their movement. You did? With a nod, he pulled something from his back pocket and slid it across the table to me. I looked down to see a leather pouch. Picking it up, I ran my fingers over the smooth hide, tracing the tiny, intricate designs etched across the front. A sprig of lavender, the leaf of motherwort. When did you make this? I started it a couple days ago. Stepping close to me, he brushed his hand over the basket of the table, gently fingering the delicate white blooms of the yarrow as his voice fell low and close to my ear. I figured you needed something to keep your medicine in. Thank you. It's beautiful. My eyes wavered with the unexpected prick of tears. I had not been able to push away the feeling of being a burden, despite Domingue's attempts to tell me otherwise. And his gesture was subtle but direct. He was giving me something I could rebuild with, something that tethered me to this place, to his world, a gift that told me in a quiet and unassuming way that this was my home now.